He noticed her because she didn't belong. Not in that place, not in that light, not in the static hum of fluorescent hallway bulbs and third-floor faculty offices where ambition hung on every wall and framed diplomas and neatly color-coded schedules. She walked differently, almost defiantly slow, as if time didn't dictate her presence there, and her hair, wind-tossed and too casually pinned, wasn't pretending to impress anyone. 23-year-old Liam Delaney, a senior philosophy student known for cutting classes and quoting Camus at parties he never stayed long enough to clean up after, watched her from the far end of the corridor. She wasn't classically beautiful, there were faint laugh lines near her eyes and a downward curve to her mouth that suggested laughter hadn't visited in a while, but she moved with the assurance of someone who had once loved life very much and perhaps wasn't sure if she still did. He had no reason to speak to her that day. No class that required her signature, no administrative duty forcing proximity. She was new. He knew that much. A guest lecturer, according to the bulletin board where her name, Dr. Miriam Clark, had been hastily pinned in the lower corner like an afterthought. No headshot. No credentials printed in proud bold. Just black ink on white paper, modernist women writers and the invention of self. It sounded lonely. He approached under the pretense of asking for directions to a class he wasn't enrolled in. She didn't flinch. Her voice was low, warm, precise, a little husky, like it had once been louder but learned to speak softly to be heard. She glanced at his t-shirt, a vintage punk band, and raised a brow. Not judgment. Curiosity. A flicker. Then she gave the directions he didn't need and walked away before he could prolong the lie. It would have ended there. But life, unlike fiction, doesn't build its moments with clean lines and obvious foreshadowing. It returns, quietly, through patterns and absurdity. He saw her again that evening at a local bookstore. She was crouched in the poetry section, thumbing through a battered copy of Letters to a Young Poet, when he turned the corner holding a thermos of cheap black coffee and a second-hand Bukowski. She didn't notice him at first. He watched her run her fingers down the spine of the book before placing it back on the shelf as if touching it hurt. He spoke then, softly but without hesitation, "Too many ghosts in Rilke?" She didn't look startled. Just amused. Her lips curved, almost smiling. "Only the ones that know your name." That was how it began. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without pretense. In the days that followed, Liam found himself orbiting her presence like a moth unsure whether the light was a promise or a trap. She never invited closeness, but neither did she repel it. They met again accidentally on purpose near the campus cafe. She had a novel tucked under her arm, Mrs. Dalloway, and a paper cup of tea that she let grow cold as she read. He sat beside her without asking. She didn't tell him to leave. Their conversations were odd at first. Awkward, intellectual, sporadically too honest. She made references he didn't catch, he made jokes that made her blink, then smirk. He liked that she didn't fill silence with noise. She liked that he didn't treat her like a relic. One afternoon, when the air was brittle with the promise of rain and the lawn was empty of students, he found her seated on a bench, fingers curled around a notebook filled with half-crossed sentences. She looked tired, not in the physical sense, but the way people look when they've lived too long in rooms that don't hear them. He said nothing, just sat beside her and pulled a cigarette from his coat pocket, offering it wordlessly. She hesitated, her expression unreadable, then took it. They smoked in silence. Shared a stillness that asked for nothing. And then, as if it had cost her something to say it, she whispered, "I used to laugh more. Before." He didn't press. Just responded, "You still could." She turned her head. Their eyes met, hers glazed slightly with some distant pain, his wide open, stupidly earnest, and then he did something small, strange, spontaneous. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ridiculous plastic ring from a vending machine. A neon green frog. Cheap and absurd. Without words, he held it out. She looked at it, incredulous. "What is that?" "A promise that today's not done with you," he said. "Put it on and you owe the world one laugh." That's the rule. For the first time, her mouth broke open into something real. Not a smirk. Not a polite smile. A laugh. Full-throated, unexpected, and undeniably hers. It made her look years younger. Or maybe just there, in the moment, in her body. She slipped the ring onto her index finger and shook her head. "You're ridiculous. Most useful thing I've been called all week." They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But the moment belonged to them. And that laugh, cracked open like a secret she hadn't meant to tell, was the first real thing either of them had given anyone in a long time. The first time Liam kissed her, they were hidden in the back stairwell of the Humanities building, where the walls were still painted in the same beige from 20 years ago and the lights flickered with a rhythm that made silence feel more like a dare. He didn't plan it. He had stayed late after one of her seminars, helping her carry old books to her office even though she hadn't asked. She had just finished reshelving them, turned around to thank him, and he had been standing there, not saying anything, just watching her as if he'd suddenly remembered something urgent and stupid and impossible to hold back. She didn't pull away. She didn't even seem surprised. It wasn't passion or heat or fantasy. It was quiet, slow, patient, like something they were owed. Afterward, she sat down in the chair beside her desk, and he stayed standing, not knowing what to say, until she looked up and said, "You should leave before someone sees." He nodded, and left without speaking. That night, she didn't sleep. And neither did he. For weeks after, they said nothing about what had happened. Their conversations continued, full of literature and contradictions and questions that never landed cleanly, but there was a tension now, sharpened by memory, softened by restraint. He touched her hand once while passing her a cup of tea, and she froze for a second too long. She called it inappropriate. He called it necessary. She said it wouldn't happen again. He asked if that was a promise or a decision. The second time was at her house. He had walked her home after a late evening panel she was moderating downtown. It had rained, and her shoes were soaked, and her voice was hoarse from speaking over the crowd. She offered him tea. He said yes. The front of her house looked like someone else had chosen it, tidy, symmetrical, expensive, but the inside was lived in, honest, cluttered with books and notes and an old record player she hadn't used in years. He stood in her living room while she boiled water in the kitchen, and when she returned with 2 mugs, she handed him one and said, "This is a mistake." He drank anyway. The lines blurred after that. Not all at once. Slowly. Carefully. With a paranoia that made their affection feel like trespassing. She didn't want neighbors to see. He didn't want classmates to wonder. She told him, one night, that she had been married once. It didn't last. No children. Nothing left. He asked her why it ended. She looked at him for a long time before answering. He needed someone I couldn't be. Liam didn't know how to respond. So he didn't. He had his own scars. His father had left when he was 12. His mother remarried a man who spoke in rules and consequences. They didn't speak often. He told her that once, and she said, "That explains the way you sit in silence like it's a weapon." He said, "Maybe I just don't like the sound of myself." She said, "Then why do you write in the margins of every book you own?" He said, "Because I don't want to forget that I was there." Rumors started 2 months in. Nothing definite. Whispers. Jokes. A glance from a classmate too curious for comfort. Someone had seen him walking out of her office too late. Someone else had mentioned seeing them at the bookstore at night. He tried to act unfazed, but it was getting harder. She became more distant, more careful, checking the hallway twice before opening her door. He hated that. He told her so. She reminded him that she had more to lose. He said he didn't care. She said that was exactly the problem. They didn't argue often, but when they did, it was brutal in its precision. Then came the phone call. He was alone in his apartment, lying on the floor with a notebook open on his chest, when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end was calm, slow, deliberate. "Male. You think no one notices," the voice said. "You think people don't talk." Liam sat up. Who is this? You should be more careful, the voice continued. People are watching. People who don't forget things. You're playing with fire, and she's already burned enough. Then the call ended. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't tell her for 3 days. When he finally did, she didn't say anything. She just sat down, looked at the floor, and stayed there until the light in the room shifted from orange to gray. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. I told you this couldn't last. He said, you're not scared of what people think. You're scared of being happy and having it ripped away again. She didn't respond. He stood there for a long time, waiting. Then he walked out the door, wondering if she'd follow. She didn't. And yet, he came back the next day. She let him in. They didn't talk about the phone call again. Not then. But it was always there now, between them. Something unsaid, something loud. The silence, for once, didn't feel like safety. It felt like a countdown. The only thing they had left was night. Daytime had too many eyes, too many polite conversations that carried too much weight, too many emails she couldn't ignore and too many glances he couldn't answer for. But at night, they could speak without watching the door, without measuring every word for possible use against them. Sometimes they met in her house, sometimes they walked the edge of the city where the streetlights were burned out and no one looked twice. They didn't talk about the future anymore, not in specific terms, not with timelines or hopes. They talked about the past, not because it mattered, but because it was already over and couldn't be changed. He told her once about a teacher he had in high school who told him he'd never learn discipline. She asked if he agreed. He said, I don't think I care enough about the right things. She asked what the right things were. He said, not you, apparently. She looked at him, not smiling. That's not funny. He shrugged. Wasn't meant to be. She told him about her father, a man who spent his life demanding silence from everyone and called it respect. She had spent her 20s pretending she wasn't angry, her 30s pretending she was over it, and now, in her 40s, she was too tired to pretend anything. He said, I think that's why I like you. You don't ask anyone for permission to exist. She said, that's not always a compliment. He said, it is when you've spent most of your life asking. The nights got longer, not because the days were shorter, but because they stayed together longer. He started writing again, nothing finished, nothing polished, just fragments, things she said, things he didn't know how to explain. She never asked to read them. She just asked if he still was. He said yes. That was enough for her. Then one night, they were sitting in her parked car just off the edge of campus, not touching, just talking, her hands on the steering wheel, his face turned toward the window, and she said, I don't know what I'm doing. He said, you're not alone in that. She said, I mean with you. With this. I didn't expect to feel anything. He said, that's what makes it real. She said, that's what makes it dangerous. He looked at her, and she didn't look away. He leaned in, and this time, she didn't stop him. That night, he stayed until morning. But real things don't stay hidden forever. A week later, they were walking out of a small cafe on the far side of town, a place that didn't see much foot traffic from anyone connected to the university, and they had let their guard down. She laughed too loud at something he said, touched his arm without thinking. It was supposed to be safe. It wasn't. They didn't notice the woman sitting 2 tables behind them. She noticed them. Her name was Lauren Wilkes. She was a part-time graduate assistant in the English department. She worked directly under Miriam's colleague. She had seen Liam before. She didn't say anything that day. She just watched them leave. The email came the next morning. It was sent from a burner address. No name. No direct threat. Just a screenshot, blurry, but recognizable. The two of them standing close, his hand on her back, her face turned toward him, smiling. No caption. No context. It was sent to Miriam. She didn't respond. She didn't forward it. She didn't mention it in class. But she called Liam that night. "I think we're out of time." He was silent for a moment. "Do you want to end it?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't want to be a secret anymore." "Then don't be." "It's not that simple." "It is to me." "Well, that's the difference, isn't it?" He didn't hang up. She didn't either. Neither of them said goodbye. The next night, they didn't meet. The one after that, he waited outside her house for 2 hours. She didn't come to the door. He started to wonder if she was trying to protect herself or trying to protect him. He started to wonder if there was a difference. 2 days later, she showed up at his apartment, unannounced, tired, her coat soaked from rain, her hands shaking from the cold. She didn't come inside. She didn't ask to. She just looked at him and said, "I don't care what they say. I'm not running from this." He let her in. They didn't speak much that night. She left in the morning. Nothing was solved. But it wasn't over. Not yet. And neither of them knew what came next. But someone did. Lauren hadn't sent the email to the department. Not yet. But she had told someone else. Someone who wouldn't keep quiet. The silence they had lived in was about to be broken. And this time, it wouldn't be under their control. The invitation had been on her desk for over a week before she acknowledged it. A printed card, formal, cream-colored, embossed with an event logo and the kind of font people only use when they want something to look important. It was for the department's annual academic conference, hosted in the main auditorium, open to faculty, students, and the public. She had attended once, years ago, before she had burned out and stepped away from the circuit of nodding, networking, and performative intellectualism. This time, she was expected to moderate a panel. It wasn't optional. Her name was printed in the program, her bio listed, her credentials updated without her input. When Liam saw the invitation on her table, he didn't comment. She didn't bring it up until 3 days before the event. "I have to go," she said, sitting at his kitchen table, flipping through the program like she wasn't already familiar with every name inside. "I figured," he said, not looking up. "They'll expect me to stay through the closing address." "I know. They'll expect me to answer questions. To mingle. Then don't. That's not how this works." He stood up and walked to the sink. "It's not working anyway." She closed the program. "Do you want me to stop pretending?" "I want to stop pretending that any of this is about what's right for the department. Or for your job. Or your reputation. This is about fear." She stood. "You think I'm afraid of them?" "I think you're afraid of being seen with me. Not because it's wrong, but because it's not easy to explain. I'm 43, Liam. I don't owe anyone an explanation, but that doesn't mean I can survive the wrong kind of attention. And I'm supposed to just stay in the background? Hide until the semester ends? What happens then?" We both knew this had a shelf life. "No, you assumed that. You decided that." She turned away, picked up the program again. "Don't come." "I wasn't planning to." She left without saying anything else. On the day of the conference, the auditorium was full. Students filled the first 5 rows, most of them there for credit, a few because they genuinely cared. Faculty members wandered between the front tables, speaking in low, strategic tones. Miriam sat at the far end of the panel table, a stack of notes in front of her, a bottle of water unopened at her side. She hadn't slept the night before. She hadn't eaten breakfast. She didn't expect to speak much. Just introduce the topic, keep time, thank the participants. Safe. Professional. Contained. Liam wasn't supposed to be there. He sat in the back, not taking notes, not even pretending to. He watched her the entire time. She didn't look at him once. It was near the end of the panel when it happened. One of the graduate students from the literature department, someone she barely knew, someone Lauren must have spoken to, stood to ask a question. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with a smile that was just tight enough to be malicious. This panel raises important issues about ethics in representation and responsibility. I wonder, Dr. Clark, if you could comment on the ethical dimensions of relationships that compromise professional boundaries, especially those involving power dynamics between faculty and students. The room changed. Not physically, not with sound, but with pressure. Faces turned. Heads tilted slightly. Even the other panelists froze. Miriam looked directly at the student. Her voice didn't shake. If you have something to say, say it plainly. I think I just did. More eyes turned toward the back. Toward Liam. He stood up. Miriam saw him before the rest did. For a second, she looked like she might shake her head, stop him. But she didn't. He walked down the aisle, not fast, not slow. He stopped near the front, turned to face the room. I'm not going to explain anything, he said. Not to you, not to anyone here. But I'm not going to lie about it either. I care about her. I chose this. She didn't manipulate me. She didn't take advantage of me. She didn't ask me for anything. I showed up. Over and over. Because I wanted to. Because it mattered. Whatever you think you know, you don't. The room didn't applaud. It didn't hiss. It just watched. Then he walked out. Miriam didn't follow. Not immediately. She sat through the rest of the panel. She answered 2 more questions. Then she stood, gathered her things, and left through the side door. The department chair called her that evening. Left a message. Asked to speak the next day. She didn't return the call. She went to his apartment instead. He was on the floor, same as before, notebook in hand, no music playing, no lights on except the one over the stove. She sat across from him. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. You didn't have to. I know. They sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, It's out now. Yeah. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I. She looked at him. I didn't want this to be a performance. It wasn't. It was a choice. She closed her eyes. Then let's stop pretending it wasn't real. She didn't lose her job, but everything changed anyway. The department didn't speak directly about it. There were no formal accusations, no public statements, no disciplinary actions that could be traced to a rule. But meetings she used to be invited to stopped including her. Colleagues she had once collaborated with now kept a distance. Invitations dried up. The hallway conversations that used to pause when she passed through stopped pretending to be private. It wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, it was something worse, it was a quiet retreat from inclusion, a slow erasure that came without confrontation. She still lectured. She still graded. She still answered emails and submitted her syllabi on time. But she no longer felt part of the place. Not because they pushed her out directly, but because every look reminded her that they had already made their decision. Liam graduated in silence. No one said anything to his face. His name was read aloud like everyone else's, his hands received a diploma like everyone else's. But the way some professors avoided his eye during the handshake said more than any speech could. He didn't bring his mother. She had sent a short text the week before, asking if he was still involved with that woman. He didn't reply. She didn't follow up. After the ceremony, they walked home together. No photos. No celebration. Just the 2 of them, walking without talking, both of them aware that whatever was ahead would not be shaped by ceremony. He started looking for jobs, mostly freelance work, tutoring, anything that kept him from having to explain his choices to people who weren't asking in good faith. She kept working at the university, kept showing up every morning, kept answering every question as if it were only about the subject and not about her. He stayed at her house most nights. Some days, he left early, before her neighbors were outside. Some days, he didn't. they stopped pretending they had control over the story other people told. But something between them began to shift. Not because the feelings faded, but because the silence that once protected them no longer served any purpose. There was nothing left to hide, but that didn't mean they knew what to say. One morning, while she was making coffee, he asked, "Is this what you want?" She didn't turn around. "What does that mean?" "Us. This. Everything it's become." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Sometimes I don't know how to want things anymore." He nodded. "I think I still do." She poured 2 cups. She only drank half of hers. Later that week, he got an offer to move. A position in another city. Temporary, part-time, but something with a future if he worked for it. He told her the same night. She listened quietly. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. "I want you to want to stay," she said. "That's not the same thing." "I know." He didn't bring it up again for 2 days. Then, while folding laundry in her living room, he said, "It's not about leaving you." She said, "That's exactly what it's about." "No, it's about not being afraid of who I am when I'm not next to you." She sat down. "I don't know how to ask you to stay without feeling selfish." "You're allowed to be selfish." "So are you." He didn't pack that night. But he started sorting through his things. The morning of his departure, she didn't try to stop him. She helped him zip the suitcase. She stood by the door while he tied his shoes. He said, "I don't know if this is the right decision." She said, "I don't know if that matters anymore." He looked at her. "So that's it?" "No," she said. "It's not it. It's just not the end of the story we thought we were telling. I didn't want it to end at all." "Then maybe it hasn't." He kissed her. Not like a goodbye. Not like a promise. Just like a fact. She watched him leave. The door closed. She didn't cry. Not right away. Not until she opened the kitchen drawer 2 days later and saw the plastic frog ring still sitting there. She picked it up, held it in her hand for a moment, and then put it on. She stood in her empty kitchen, wearing a ridiculous piece of plastic, and laughed once, just once, quietly. The phone rang. She didn't answer. Not yet.